delay. Recordings in progress. All right. What I'm going to say to you is that we have the most recent change was the Department of Justice has gotten involved in this process as a friend of the court. And although they seem to be going forward with this date of August the 17th, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment, there is a concern on the part of the Department of Justice about how this is going to be implemented. And so what's going to happen is sometime in November, they're going to get together at the Department of Justice and look at what we're doing and decide if they agree that it's the right thing or it should be changed. So what we're doing today is not definitive. I was on the phone with CAR Legal last week a couple of times asking certain questions, and they started out the conversation by saying, this is 99% accurate, but it may change. So understand that the forms themselves may change, what we're doing may change, and I think that it's important to keep that in mind. We're going to move fairly quickly today in that we're just going to take glances at these forms, and I'm going to highlight a couple of different things to you. But we're going to talk more about the implementation of these things and what you need to be doing and what you need to be practicing on a daily basis. Having said that, we are going to follow up this meeting with in-office workshops where we're going to sit down with the forms, go through them with scripts and go through them and with sample videos and things that you can release to your clients or on social media explaining these things. Coincidentally, just as we were ready to start, Haley comes to me and says, hey, there's a couple that just walked through the front door. Interestingly enough, her name was Tony, his name was Randy. They said, hey, look, we're buyers. We've been hearing all this stuff. Can somebody explain these new forms to us? Because we don't know what's going on. There's a clamoring in the public for us to be able to give explanation to these things, and we've yet to do that. And hopefully today will set us on the right path. I want to thank Todd Mendoza for a moment for setting me straight with my attitude. I have been wandering around bemoaning the fact that all this was going to happen, and it was a pain in the neck. And you know what? It is what it is. It is where we are today. And so instead of being negative about it, let's just grab this bull by the horn and move forward with what we are and what we're doing and what we have to do, because it is the law and it is changing what we do. Okay? So let's have a better attitude about it and see it as a big change, which also gives us a huge opportunity to show to our clients that we're specifically able and competent and use it as an opportunity to show our professionalism. And I think that we can all do that if we adjust our mental attitude towards where we're at. And know that you're going to have to do it with a degree of flexibility because it's likely to change. I'll explain what DOJ is looking at and why it's important to know what you're doing and to be able to articulate your value if you're representing a buyer. Okay? Having said that, let me deal with some dates right away. The effective date of the lawsuit and its settlement is August the 17th. Unless your MLS has chosen a different date. Barry's is switching on August the 12th. So for all of you, the effective date of all of this is August the 12th, not the 17th. I repeat, August 12th, not the 17th. Another important date is July the 24th. We are sitting on the 22nd today. Next Wednesday, this week, day after tomorrow, the new forms are released by CAR. They will be on zip forms. Everything that I'm going to show you today has a big draft written across it, and it may change. These were accurate as of the 18th. I'm not sure that they're accurate today. There are some changes to a couple of forms that have been discussed, and we will know when they release them. Secondly, as it relates to the 24th date, you will be obligated by law to use the CAR forms as of Wednesday. You do not have to use buyer brokers forms for compensation that day. You can wait until August the 12th. I would not suggest that you do that. I would get in the habit of doing this and doing it as quickly as you can. We're going to touch on these forms today, and I've given you a couple of cheat sheets, and all of the forms are available, and we will send you a link to where you can get to all of the relevant forms. Knowing a little bit about these forms is important. Knowing a lot about them is really, you don't need me to tell you how to read a form. You can read a form. We will poke holes in them, and we'll answer all the questions in the workshops starting next week. We're going to do one in every single office. Make it a point to be there because you're going to need to know it. If you're super great with forms, awesome. I may call you because we don't really know exactly how they're going to end up. I can also tell you that as it relates to zip forms, we are not certain whether CAR is going to release the forms in bundled format or not. If they do not, we as a company will put them together in bundled formats for you after Wednesday. So that when you're going to go take a listing, you know exactly what to pull up. You pull up a listing packet, it'll all be there. You pull up a buyer's representation packet, it'll all be there. And there will be more forms than you need in each bundle. Just pick the ones you need and move forward with those. So if CAR doesn't bundle them, we will bundle them for you in conjunction with transaction coordination so that we know exactly what's there and what you need to have. Any questions so far? Okay, let's get to the forms themselves. I'm going to put on my glasses and look at my notes. If you have this quick summary release, this will be beneficial to you moving forward. It's the sheet that tells you, it's a little cheat sheet about the forms, gives you a couple of highlights. We're going to touch on these highlights today, and then we'll kind of go from there. Fair enough? Let's start with the BCA, which is the Broker Compensation Advisory Form. This is a new form. And specifically, it says, if you're looking at the brief description of the form, you'll notice that in this picture here, when we bring the form up, there we go. Notice that at the very top, it has a revision date. This revision date is 7/24. This is the newest form. When you go into zip forms and you're using these forms, make sure the form you are using, particularly when it comes to an RPA, an RLA, that you're using the most recent form. Check the date, okay? This form is designed for a one-pager, or is it 2 pages? 2 pages? 2 pages, okay. This explains how brokers get paid in a transaction. In listing agreements in paragraph 1, it discusses the seller side of the transaction and how payments are made to listing brokers. Buyer's representation agreements in paragraph 2, it discusses the obligation they have to a written compensation with a buyer. Paragraph 3 addresses the ways a buyer's broker may be paid, the two primary options being the buyer pays directly, or the second one, seller pays pursuant to the terms of the agreement. Now, let me tell you a little bit, and let's delve for a moment into the white elephant in the room. And that is that most of us, if we were away at a vacation resort area, would not sign one of these buyer's brokers agreements. Get over it, because you're going to have to. And you need to be authentic with your clients about what you're doing. And you need to make it so that you feel comfortable and they feel comfortable signing these forms. Understand, it's the law. After the 12th, you're not going to be able to decide whether you want to use these forms or not. You must use them. So instead of trying to wrangle clients into a long-term form, instead of trying to strong arm them into signing documents, learn to articulate your value. Learn why it's important. And by the way, we will be creating for the listing presentation in Moxie and for the buyer's presentation in Moxie, and you'll be able to use them separately, a page that discusses the 4 sections of a transaction as a buyer and the 4 sections of transaction as a seller. And you'll be able to use this one page to articulate your own personal value if you choose to do it in that manner. So you'll see that coming out this week. So you'll have a form that will assist you in that area. But articulating your value is the big opportunity with this big change. For a moment, let me ask you a question. What is changing with all of this that we're going through? What's changing? Structurally, is a real estate transaction changing at all? No. What's changing are the forms. What's changing is when somebody comes into an open house. What's changing is we need to talk to a seller or a buyer, and we need to have these conversations up front where we may have just assumed they would be the case before. But structurally, nothing is changing about a transaction. It's our ability to be professional about this that's going to help us get through this change, and that will secure us more clients than we've ever had before. Explaining it, articulating your value is where the benefit of this lies. And it will make you stronger as an agent if you're able to accomplish and do this, okay? Because structurally, nothing really has changed. We'll talk about that in a minute when we talk to sellers. By the way, we're going to give you some scripts and dialogues and some videos to use with buyers and sellers in the workshops that we'll be starting next week, okay?
I'm sorry, but I have a question.
I don't know that I have an answer, but try me.
Thank you. I think one big structural change is that the mortgage is no longer covering commissions, and the buyers and sellers are responsible for that. It used to be that it was included in the mortgage, and now it's not. That seems like a big structural change to me, but maybe I'm missing something. Thank you.
Sure. What you're missing, and I guess I should look at this camera. What you're missing with this is that it really hasn't changed. So let's talk about this for a moment, because when you sit down with a seller and a seller looks at his or her net sheet, what are they looking at? They're looking at the commission in general, right? They're looking at that dollar amount. How many times do you say, well, if they say, well, if I'm going to pay that, then my price is going to be this, right? You sit down with the comps, you show them what's there, and they bake into the price of the house what commission they're going to pay. And that includes the commission that they're paying out to a buyer's agent. That hasn't changed. That can still happen. It's most likely that will continue to happen in most price ranges. Fannie Mae, VA, FHA, and most lenders now will allow additional seller compensation to cover the cost of a commission. So it's really not changing the mortgage circumstance at all. But it's always been baked into the price, and that's not changing. So don't think that it changes the mortgage structure, because it doesn't. Anybody? That makes sense to everyone? Yes, the forms change, and the way that the contract is worded changes. Yes, absolutely. But structurally, the transactions themselves don't change at all. Okay, let's go to the next form, which is the BRBC. This is the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. Love this one. Okay, the form satisfies the obligation to have a written agreement with the buyer. The property is to be acquired, defaults to a single family home, condo, mobile home with options for multiple dwellings. It specifies a general location of the property, either city or county, that needs to be specified. The buyer's preferences can be specified in paragraph 2C, or you can attach a new form, which is called the Buyer Identification of Preferences and Priorities, which is the BIPP form. Whatever, if you want to use the form, you can. I'm not sure that we haven't really been using that form mentally when we sit down with them and we ask, what do you want in a house, right? You're already using that form mentally. You may even have them write down the things in your presentation that you want them to, that a buyer wants in a house. And we all know that they don't necessarily stick to that, that they see different things, and because buying is an emotional process. So you can use this new form, the BIPP form, if you want to. The broker's compensation is specified in paragraph 2E1. And here's what's interesting. The broker may receive payments from a seller that are credited against the buyer's obligation. The broker is not to receive any overage. So if you write into your buyer's compensation agreement so that you can get a buyer to sign one, hey, look, I'll just make it for $1. and you can you can just that way you feel comfortable signing this form. Don't do that, because if you do and you go into contract on that property and you have to disclose the form to the seller, which by the way you will have to do, and they see that you were willing to represent them for $1, guess what you get paid? $1. Okay, so put in there what you expect to be paid. Yes. Yeah, to a degree there is a guideline. To a degree there is a guideline. Your independent contractor's agreement with W Real Estate states that anything that you accept under 2.5%, you need to get approval on. In fact, some of the forms themselves say that this is an agreement between the brokerage and the client, and may within 5 days be approved or disapproved by the brokerage. It says that in some of the forms now. Okay. So if you're going to go in and accept lesser commissions, you need to talk to your manager or somebody at the company and get approval to do that. Okay. But understand, you can't write 2% in that form, get approval for it, and then the seller, you find them a property where the seller's going to pay 2.5 or has agreed to pay 2.5 or 3, you're not going to get the difference. You're going to get what the form says, because you have to give a copy of this form with the presentation of the offer. Okay.
So what if there's, you say 2.5%, you present your offer and they're giving 3, can you redo the form?
Nope. 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 Can't redo the form. It's kind of one of those things, you can always go down, but you can't go up. Right. What we're going to see, I'm certain, is some sellers saying, well, wait a minute, I'd pay that much if I got this price. I'm willing to take less. I'll pay less. So the question becomes, does the buyer have the cash to pay the difference, or are you willing to negotiate? And remember, you're not obligated to a contract to represent someone, just like a seller is not obligated or a buyer is not obligated if there's a counteroffer. Neither are you. If they want you to work for 1% and you say no, guess what? You don't have to participate in the transaction. You can bow out. Okay. I don't think that's going to happen if you can articulate your value. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
Can we call legally when we have a buyer? Can we just automatically call the listing agent, and can they tell us what they're actually willing to?
Yes. Yes. Okay.
We can't hear the question. We cannot hear
Okay.
her.
The question was,
Yeah,
can,
excuse me, guys, if we're gonna ask a question,
let me, I'll repeat it. I'll repeat it. So the question was, if someone says, can you call, just as an agent, can you just call the other agent and say, hey, what is your seller willing to pay? The answer is yes, but let me take that a little bit further, okay? This is the point where the Department of Justice is looking at what we're doing, because the Department of Justice doesn't like the idea that the only place that we cannot advertise the percentage being paid by the seller is the multiple listing. They don't like the idea of us being able to advertise compensation everywhere else, including private conversations, without the buyers and sellers knowing. This is the point that they're looking at. So they're going to be watching us in this particular phase between now and November to figure out how they're going to deal with this and whether they're going to have a different way of doing it. Let me say this to you. And I had this conversation with an agent up in Windsor. The person asked me, can I advertise with a banner that my seller is willing to pay 2.5% for a buyer's representation? And my answer was yes, you can advertise that. However, I would not suggest you do it. And here's the reason why. If you put 2.5% in that, and the compensation that the buyer's broker was willing to work for was 2%, you've just committed yourself to a higher number. So I wouldn't put in the percentage. I would say, conversely, the seller is willing to consider a buyer concession for a broker's compensation. Now, there's one other thing. There are some MLSs that have a box that they still have in their stuff that you can check if the buyer is willing to pay a buyer, or the seller is willing to pay a buyer's broker's compensation. My suspicion is that will go away by August 17th, but I'm not sure on that. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the question is, these forms for buyer agreements need to be filled out in implied agency, correct?
Correct.
I know that they're not stating, I mean, statement was once you enter the house, but it's before that.
Okay, so the question is, do these forms apply in advance or at the time? We're going to talk about that in just a moment, particularly as it relates to buyer representation. My suggestion is that you sit down and do a buyer consultation with every buyer you're going to work with. Where that changes is somebody calls you randomly and says, hey, I want to look at the house on 123 Cherry Street. Will you show it to me this afternoon at 3? Our response generally is, yes, I will show you that house. You can't do that anymore. They have to sign one of these agreements prior to looking at a house. You cannot show them the house without getting a form signed in advance.
And
Okay.
then do we send that over to the listing agent?
The question was, do you have to send that over to the listing agent? No, not in advance. Just as long as you have it, then you can represent them. And this comes up to play. We'll go over this in just a second when we get to the buyers and broker open houses, okay? Or open houses. Let's move to the next form.
Can I
Which is-
ask you one quick question?
Yes.
This, Ellen, why would you not always put 3% for the amount of compensation? Because you said you can go down, but you can't go up. So wouldn't you
Well-
suggest we always put 3% there?
Amen.
Thank you.
You know, if you're willing to work for less and you want to get approval, go ahead. But I think if you're able to articulate your value, there's no reason it shouldn't say 3%. You can always renegotiate that when the counteroffer comes back and offers you less. But yes, I would put in 3% arbitrarily. That's just me, though. I have no
Well,
challenge.
most of them are 2%, but there are those that are 3%. And if you put 2.5%, if I'm understanding you, that's what you get. So,
You get what you put in this form with agreed compensation.
okay, thank you.
I would have my conversation with the buyer and say, look, I'm going to put 3% in here, and that's what we're going to agree to. If I can't get the seller to pay that, you and I can renegotiate this, because you can do that when you get a counter offer back, or if you're presenting on a property where the seller is only willing to pay 2.5 or 2 or whatever the number is. Yes. Yes. You can have an amendment agreement, and we'll talk about that in a second, because there is a form that you can use to amend the broker's compensation form. Okay, there's an amendment that you can have to that. You don't have to create the form all over again. Let's keep moving because we're running out of time. Cancellation of buyer representation, the COBR form. This has an optional box that was added to paragraph 2 to recognize that both the buyer and broker mutually agree to cancel. And there's a document that you have that talks about the difference between exclusive and non-exclusive. Do you have that in front of you? There should have been one in the group of, I don't know if I'll have to, can somebody grab for me? Todd, could you grab on the printer in the back? I printed out some of those, some paperwork. And I'll go over that in a second, because I'll share with you exactly what this means. So anyway, that's what this form is. It's to cancel representation. Okay. Let's move on to the DMBR. This is the disclosure and modification of buyer representation agreement, which Constance goes to what you had asked me about. This form is to be used to modify the buyer representation agreement. It's been in effect. It will go into effect on July the 24th. In forms, and this might apply specifically to people like Tim, who if you've been having somebody sign a buyer's broker's agreement already, a representation agreement, you will need to use this form to adjust those forms that you already have. So if you're using a buyer's broker's agreement, or you have had somebody sign one in advance of 24th, you need to amend it with this document. Okay, so it addresses those issues. That this is the one that you would use. All right, let's go to the DMLA. By the way, we're moving fast because I want to keep this as light as we can. In the workshops, we will go over each one of these forms, but I at least want you to be aware of what the forms are now and what you're going to be using, right? Okay, so this is the disclosure and modification of a listing agreement. And here is something that you can either use as an opportunity or be afraid of. If you have a property which is not closing escrow before August the 17th, then the question becomes, do you need to have a new listing agreement signed? The answer is it depends. First of all, it depends on whether or not you want to use the opportunity to get a price reduction, an extension of the listing agreement. If you feel confident about these forms and your explanation of them, I would use this as an opportunity to say, hey, look, the law's changed. We need to sign some new forms. Let's talk about your price. Let's talk about the length of our agreement. And if we're in agreement, you know that I'm doing all the work I can for you. I've shown that by what I'm doing. And I'd like an extension of 60 days. And I think we just adjust the price to this. You can do that. If you don't do that, then you need to at least have this form signed, which says, hey, these are the new terms of that agreement. Here's what's changed. It's a modification to that document. Yes.
And that's needed as of, would it be August 12th because of the MLS?
Yes.
Can you repeat that question?
Sorry.
Can you repeat that question?
The question was whether that document's needed before the 12th, and the answer is yes, because the 12th is the date that our MLS has chosen, not the 17th. By the way, now that you bring that up, let me bring up another issue. If you have a real estate transaction where you are representing the buyer or the seller that is in escrow but not closing before the 12th, make a copy of the MLS printout, the full printout, where it specifies the buyer's broker's compensation. Make a copy of it, stick it in your file, and send it to transaction coordination. Because after the 12th, no compensation information will appear any longer in the MLS. So if a seller was to raise a question about the compensation and say, I didn't agree to pay that, you have nothing to prove that they would have. That was a recommendation from CAR Legal. So if you have a listing which is not closing, which is in escrow, but not closing prior to the 12th, you need to put a copy of it. As general practice, if I were you, any listing that I have, I'd make a copy of the MLS today, drop it in, because if you, for some reason or other, don't have this form signed, or the seller doesn't want to sign this form, then you've got issues to deal with, right? So just get it signed. Yes.
So we have somebody on chat asking if this applies to commercial as well.
Does it apply to commercial? The answer is yes. We're not going over any of those forms today. If you're using CAR forms for your commercial, which you should be doing, it applies, believe it or not, to rental property as well. So yes, it applies to any place where you are getting compensation to represent a buyer, renter, whether it's commercial, industrial, or residential. There are some exclusions, but they are very few. Where were we? We're at the DMLA, right? The disclosure and modification to a listing agreement. This is the form that you have to have signed if you have a listing. You need to have this done in advance of the 12th of August. Okay. Multiple listing service agreement. The MLSA is the addendum that incorporates a language previously in the listing agreement about the advantages of being on the MLS. This form explains that that's no longer going to be, the concessions are not going to be offered in the MLS, that the seller still authorizes you to offer them elsewhere and where you can do that. Okay? Has to be signed. The MTBR, modification of terms buyer representation agreement. This form should be used to document a change in the buyer's representation agreement. There's some pre-printed language here, and you want to be aware of those changes and what those forms are like. And you should change this if you have a previous buyer broker's representation agreement. So people like Tim Bellis, he would have to use this form. MTLA, modification of terms listing agreement. This is just the same as the one before. You're modifying certain things. You need to use this form to modify them. So if you're going to change any terms of the listing agreement, you must include this. All right. This is a fun one. The OHNA. The Open House Visitor Non-Agency Disclosure and Sign-In. All right. Look, this is the fun one. When somebody walks into an open house, you're supposed to ask them, are you represented by another agent? Do you want to be represented by me, or do you just want to go through the house? And we all know what they're going to say, right? This form, if you'll notice, can you scroll down a little bit? Keep scrolling, keep scrolling, keep scrolling. Guess what? This you can use at an open house because it has a place for 6 or 7 people, right? And how many people do you think, do you notice anywhere where it says it asks for their signature? No, doesn't ask for their signature, right? So if somebody comes in through and into an open house and says, hey, my agent sent me to look at the house, or I already have an agent and I don't want to sign any of your forms, and you don't have to have them sign anything, you can simply say, who's your agent? Happy to, and your name, I can write it down here. That way I know if anything happens. They don't have to give you any information whatsoever, and you do not have to stop them from seeing the house. Okay, you can continue to show the house. Here's where the rub comes in. When they walk through the house, we're used to having this pretty little flyer about the open house that doesn't answer any specific questions other than number of bedrooms, number of bath, square footage, maybe the age, whatever, and some flowery wording, right? My suggestion to you would be when they walk through the house, they come back and they say, hey, how much are the HOAs? If they haven't signed anything, you cannot answer that question. If they say, how old is this house? You cannot answer that question. You're not supposed to give any information that would imply that you are their agent representing them. You can say, I'm simply here representing the seller. However, if you've been astute enough, and we are going to create this so that you can do this in Moxie, just put a copy of the client version of the MLS on the back of the flyer from now on. That way you can turn over the flyer and say, although I represent the seller, we're providing that information here, and you see the HOA is right here, or you see the age of the property is here, or you see the size of the lot is right here. So I would not have just that pretty little form. If I were you, would put on that back of that form the client version of the MLS. Okay, that enables you to have further conversation, but you are supposed to be able to say to them, understand please that I'm not representing you. I'm providing information on behalf of the seller.
So does that mean on our flyer, we can't put any of that information?
No, on the flyer, her question was, you can't put that information on the flyer. Yes, I'm suggesting you do put it on the back of the flyer.
No, that's the MLS sheet, but on the flyer, I always put like the size of the lot. Yeah. And then
You can put that on there. You can put whatever you want on that open house information sheet. It's just most of the time we don't put all the stuff that they would have or questions they would have, right? Like who's the builder, or you're theoretically not supposed to answer that question unless it's somewhere that you can give them. Now, you can give them the flyer, and if they ask you a question and the information's on the back, you can engage them. You can say, understand, I'm just representing the seller. However, the information you requested is right here on the back. And you can show that, you can point it out to them. If they engage further in that conversation, I'm sorry, did you? I was just going to say, if they want to further engage in conversation with them, you need to say, the new law doesn't allow me to do that unless I have you sign one of these forms. And I'm happy to have you sign it. Here's the form. And then I can share any information with you that you would like. Again, remember, these forms have a date on them. They don't have to be for a particular amount of time. And while I'm at that point, let me say this to you. The law currently in the state of California for services representation is up for review and has gone through the state Senate and House, is sitting on Governor Newsom's desk for signature, limiting professional services agreements to no more than 90 days. If he signs that, it becomes effective January the 1st. However, CAR, in in advance of and in anticipation of that being signed, you cannot have an agreement for a buyer's broker's compensation that exceeds 90 days. Although it's not the law in California, that's what the form says. So if it's in excess of that time, or yours has already run out, you need to go back with the modification of terms agreement and have that signed. Yes.
So can you just have a potential buyer, if they say they have another agent, but you're there to talk, like I don't even know how I'll do my job, like saying I can't talk to you, like it's rather like not, just can't do it. So can you say like, sign this for a day, and I know you have an agent, but sign this for today, I'll expire tomorrow, just so I can talk to you about the listing?
Yes.
Is that
So
realistic?
let me repeat the question. Can you just have somebody sign a form and say, look, I'll just represent you for 24 hours, just sign this form and I can give you all the information, because who of us is not going to want to stand there and not be able to have a conversation with a client? The answer is yes. I would make it for as short a period of time as you want it to make it. Understand that it's cancelable. Understand that the form itself defaults to non-exclusive anyway. So if you check the box, it becomes exclusive, and I'll explain that in a moment. But that would be my suggestion, is that you have a form prepared already, filled out, that is a short-term one, that you can just say to the buyer, look, put your name on here, sign this. Look, it's only good for 24 hours. It's only relative to this property. And I can tell you anything and everything you want to know, just as if I were representing. Yes. Yes.
So question on that, like if, let's say I'm working Adrian's open house, and
Yes.
then I finish, and then do I give him the form to give the seller to have on file? Who needs the form?
Okay. The question was, once this form is signed, who needs the form? You need the form, because you're representing that buyer. Otherwise, you don't need to give the form to anybody else. This is where we are today. I think that at some point, the Department of Justice may ask you to include those in files so that you know who came through and who you represented or who said they were represented. The easiest thing to do, I think, if I had a client that I knew was running around looking at open houses, I'd give him a stack of my cards and I'd say, look, when you go into an open house, they're going to ask you to sign a form. Tell them you don't want to sign a form. Give them this card and tell them you know that they can put it on their open house form, and just to put my name and number down next to yours. And if you have any questions, just call me when you're done looking at the house. Yes.
Good question. So follow up with the question. So signing that just for the day, what if the client already has an agent?
Okay. So the question was, if you're signing this for a day and the client already has an agreement with someone else, you're supposed to ask them, have you already signed an agreement of this nature with another agent? Have you signed an exclusive agreement with another agent? If you have, I can't have you sign this form or give you any information. You would need to contact your agent. I'm happy to call them right here for you if you'd like me to, so they can answer the question while you're here at the house.
Okay. So
Wait, 1 second. There was a second question.
So say someone has a listing and then somebody calls on the for sale sign and starts asking questions over the phone. Is it the same kind of thing? You have to call them right then and there. I can't answer. You need to sign this broker, agreement form, or how does that work out?
Okay, so the question here was, if somebody calls you on the phone and says, hey, I have some questions about this property, can you answer them? In theory, the answer is no. In theory, you need to send them a form that says, in order to give you this information, I need for you to sign this form. However, you can cautiously say, I'm representing the seller in the sale of this property, and I can give you information that is available to the public on the multiple listing service. I'm happy to send you that form or email the form to you, and then I'll call you back and we'll go over any information that you would like to, but understand that I'm representing only the seller. Okay? If you want further information beyond that, either contact your own agent or I'm happy to have you sign a form. It's just the law. I know it's uncomfortable, but it's the new law that we all have to abide by for now. Okay? Your question. It'll come back to you. Okay, wait 1 second. We have a question here.
Yeah, so you had mentioned that it's default non-exclusive.
Yes.
So wouldn't that mean they can sign as many as they wanted?
They can. They just need to know what they signed.
So then the question becomes in an open house is, do you sign something of this nature and was it exclusive? Because if it's not, then you can have them sign it. It doesn't matter.
That's correct. Okay, so just to catch up with everybody that may not have heard. If somebody comes into your open house and wants to look at it and they've signed a previous agreement, you have to ask them if it was an exclusive or non-exclusive agreement. Because if it was an exclusive agreement, they can't sign one with you. If it was non-exclusive, which it defaults to automatically, unless the box is checked, then you can go ahead and have them sign one for this particular property. Okay?
Well, I would say, so like 95% of buyers probably aren't gonna know exactly what they said. So if they have an agent, they're like, yes, I have an agent. So-and-so's my agent. They're probably not gonna know what box they checked, and we're not gonna know what box they checked, and they're not gonna have their agreement with them. So what do you like, say, get your agent on three-way and let's have a call all together so I can talk to you with them on the phone to tell you about the open house? I'm just like,
Okay, so the question here was, if somebody walks into an open house and you ask them, have you signed an exclusive or non-exclusive agreement? They're probably not going to know the answer to that. You can generally assume that it's non-exclusive because that's what the form defaults to. If they don't have a copy of the form, should you say, I'll call your agent right now and find out? I don't know that I would do that. I think I would just be under the assumption that they signed a non-exclusive agreement. I think I would have them sign another non-exclusive agreement. And I might, in the additional terms, state, if this individual has signed a previously exclusive agreement, then this agreement can be deemed null and void. So just add a little bit more to the form that says, we don't know for sure, but I'm not stepping on anybody's toes. If you've signed an exclusive agreement, then that's the agreement that you have. Okay. There was a question over here.
Is that answering Andrew Saltzman questions if they're going to multiple and signing forms?
Yeah, they can sign multiple forms. Yes, as long as they're non-exclusive. Okay. Did you have a question, or did I already answer it?
No, that was it.
Okay.
I have another just kind of idea on the open house. As far as the question is, wouldn't we just want to hide all information underneath these agreements?
The question was, explain hide to me.
I mean, like they want to ask the question, and I say, well, of course I'll answer the question with the agreement side, right? Or the disclosure package is available through this whatever code or link, but on top of that link, right, before you hit the information is going to be this agreement. I mean, because legally I'm obligated to, I can't answer any of these questions anyways.
Okay, so the question here was, if you have you have all this information, should you just sort it or put it out underneath the responsibility to sign or the necessity to sign an agreement? My suggestion to you would be reverse the roles. If you're the buyer, how does that sound to you? See, to me, I want transparency in a transaction as a buyer. I want to know that what I'm getting, and I want to know that the person I'm communicating with is being transparent with me. I would take that as your unwillingness to disclose something to me, and I think there was something wrong.
Right, and I would only counter that with every other service. You're signing in, you're saying I'm not going to sue you. You go get, a massage. You go get work done at your house. They're going to say, hey, I need you to sign this before I start. There's no other, industry except ours where, you get my full service without signing the paper. So the comment here was that in every other industry, you have to sign a waiver anyway. And that ours is the only industry that doesn't do that, by the way, which is part of the reason that the lawsuit went the way it did. And it's part of the reason the DOJ is still looking at this and wants it to be stronger than it already is. Right. So as a buyer, to answer your question, I would just say, well, that seems to make sense. I signed an agreement with everything else I'm doing. It depends on your presentation, right? Yeah. I mean, if you explain something enough to me, I'm going to weigh it out and decide whether I want to sign it or not. Just reverse the roles. Would you sign it? Would you accept the explanation? Do you feel comfortable giving the explanation? It was interesting. I sat with this couple that just walked in, and she goes, I've learned more from you in 5 minutes than I've read over the past week and a half, 2 weeks. Can we work with you? The answer is no, you can't work with me, but you can work with one of the agents in our office. I'll get you the information, have somebody follow up with you. I mean, like, is the explanation, it's the law, isn't that? Yeah, I would say, unfortunately, you've probably read about this lawsuit with the National Association of Realtors and all these companies. And the reality of the matter is this is what came out of it. And honestly, what happens in most law cases is the pendulum swings from here to over here. And at some point it comes back into here.
And that's likely what's going to happen with this. But for now, the structure of the real estate transaction hasn't changed, but the forms have. And unfortunately, this is where we're at today. I know it sounds ludicrous, but that's the decision of the court. Okay, let's jump on. We need to keep moving. This one, property show. Yes. Sorry, did I miss a hand?
I probably missed it, but if they don't sign it, then what do you do?
You let them go through the house. When they get through the house, just hand them the form. And if they ask you any questions, you say, I can't answer that for you unless you want to sign one of these forms. Understand I'm here just as representation of the seller. Okay. This next one is the one that you'll have. This is the property showing representation agreement. Yes.
I have one important question. What
Yes.
if you're not representing the seller?
If you're an agent here at W and you're holding an open house for someone else, you're an extension of the brokerage and it would apply to you directly the same. This next one, property showing representation agreement, the PSRA. Somebody calls you on the phone and says, I want to look at the house on 123 Cherry Street. This is the form you need to send. Okay, it'll allow for a place for 3 signatures. I'm not going to, yes. You have to do this after August the 12th. The form is available on Wednesday of this week. I would suggest you start using them now. I'd practice it now because you're going to have to do it on the 12th of August. Gives you basically have about 2 weeks to get this down. Welcome to Disneyland. All right. Yes. Oh, sorry.
So every time I show a property, they have to sign out. If I've already had my buyer exclusively sign to me that they're paying me 3%, I don't have to have that signed every time we go to a property.
Okay. So the question here was, if you've already had them sign an exclusive or non-exclusive agreement relative to an area house for a particular length of time, do you have to have this signed every time you show a property? The answer is no. This is the random person that calls you on the phone or calls on an open house sign or says something like that. Okay. Where are we? Oh, RLA. Ha 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 ha. Yes.
I'm assuming that form is in place for when they don't want to sign the representation agreement.
This is the one that you'll use if somebody calls you on the phone and wants to do it. And yes, it's something that is not longer than 30 days, but you can make it shorter. This is the one I would use if somebody randomly called me. And yes, you can use it in an open house as well.
Okay, and just why wouldn't you? I mean, if they have to sign one or the other, why wouldn't you just default to signing the buyer?
You can. It's just whatever you choose to do. Whatever you choose to do. And by the way, the cheat sheet that if you haven't gotten it, I think you have them there. There's an explanation of this on CAR on the forms. We'll send you a link to go to, and we'll send you the cheat sheet forms that go along with this stuff so that you have it, because you're going to have a ton of questions when we get to doing the workshops in office. Okay. The RLA. Is that up there? Okay. Look how it's changed. Scroll, please. So it's gone to the grid format for a listing agreement, just like the RPA has. Okay. And it's simpler and it's easy. You just got to be familiar with the form. So like when you changed the offer, the RPA, it's the same thing. It's laid out easier. It's easier to understand. You've got to sit with these forms. I would suggest you set aside some time on Wednesday, and you just look at these forms, because if you have somebody that you're working with over the weekend, this coming weekend, or you're showing houses Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you're going to have to use these forms. So I would pull them out and look at them. And you're going to have questions. Don't hesitate to call. Okay. No, they're not. CAR is releasing the forms sometime on Wednesday. I haven't seen the ones they're releasing. Everything I'm showing you today, you'll see has this big draft written across it. If there are any changes, they've covered themselves here. But what they release on Wednesday will be the forms at that point in time, unless they tell us they've changed them. You can pull them up. You can look at these draft forms. They're on CAR site. Yes, we'll send you the link if you don't have it already. Can you remind me that I said we would send them the cheat sheets and the link, please? Thank you. All right, scroll back up to the top for me for a second. Okay, a couple of lines here. Again, the form date. look at the compensation notice in item 2A. Look at C1, the buyer's compensation. Look at the additional compensation line in C2. Continue scrolling down. More. I think there's a couple other arrows. No, I didn't. That was it. Okay. I'm not going to sit here and tell you how to read the form. Read the form. Let's discuss it in the workshops. You got to go over this stuff and you got to know what it says. Okay. It's simple. It's easy. It's easier than just know that anything relative to buyer broker compensation and the MLS has been removed from the form. We're going to set the dates for them tomorrow. So we'll know soon, but I want to get I wanted to be able to look at the final forms. First of all, we wanted to make sure that they were bundled properly for you. So we could say, go to Zip Forms and pull up the bundle for listing.
So will it be, taped if you can't make the meeting?
We'll be doing them at each and every offices, not all on the same day. You'll be able to do that. Yes, we'll probably record one or two of them. I know you're going to have a ton of questions, and Dennis and I and Todd are expecting our phones to light up once these forms come out. So don't hesitate to give us a call. Okay, but yeah, we're going to do as much of it as we can in advance of the workshop. If I had to guess, I think the workshops will start next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow. Me, if I'm gone for vacation, okay, they basically have changed. They have a collar they put around me, and if I leave Sonoma County, it shocks me now. So I can't go anywhere. Yes.
Are the agents, if they miss like their office workshop, can they go to another one and it's going to be the same?
Absolutely, yes. Will it be the same? No, the questions might be different from that office, right? Or as if they've run into something that they found in that office. Yes. What we're going to hopefully give you in those office things are not only going over the forms specifically themselves, but to give you that page for a buyer consultation, for the listing consultation, or listing presentation. Those will be in Moxie once we have them. We're going to be writing those up. We've started it already. We're going to lay them out with marketing, hopefully today and tomorrow, and we'll have those forms available to you. We're hoping to have as well some sample videos that you might be able to put out either yourself or re-record if you want to do them with your own personage. Some of our agents have already done this, and believe me, the engagement that you get is interesting. It will enable you to have conversations. Remember, conversion happens when you have a face-to-face conversation. So use this as an opportunity to explain to people, and position yourself as the professional that is answering the questions and with the knowledge that you have. Remember, you may not know everything. I know I don't know everything. CAR Legal doesn't know everything. And the reality of the matter is it's a work in progress. So know that what you know is a lot more than what any seller or buyer knows. Unless they're an attorney and they've in real estate, right?
I had a question about this form.
Sorry?
I have a question about this form. Where would you put the cooperating? I know you can't call it that now, but if I do my job and the seller says, yes, I'll compensate the buyer's broker, where do you put that on this form now?
That's a separate form. It's not this form. There's a box. You mean the box? There's a box to check if you're offering a commission. Is that what you're saying? The seller seller agrees that they're going to offer a commission. Is that the question?
Yes, my seller
okay.
says
Let me look.
2.5%. Where do I say that? Not to me, but to the other side.
Okay. Under C1, all the way across, it says blank percentage of this listing and blank or blank. See the attached compensation schedule. It's on that schedule that you would specify. Look at C2, additional compensation to seller's broker if buyer is unrepresented. It's the other form, that one that's mentioned in this section right here. Did that show up? Did I put my hand up there? No, it doesn't. No. Okay. So it's in C1. There's another section where it does it as well. So review the form and we'll go over it. If you have any questions or can't see it, don't hesitate to give me a call. All right, let's go to the RPA. The biggest thing with this is that the cooperating broker compensation language has been removed entirely. And the escrow instructions have also that specify where the compensation comes from or goes to has been eliminated. You'll note here that it says, see June quick summary for additional comp. That's changed. There's a new July one, and they're certain to release another one soon. All right, next one, which is the SPBB. This one is a new version. This identifies the amount the buyer is asking the seller to pay. It limits it to the amount that was specified in the buyer's representation agreement, and also specifically says that there is no buyer representation agreement. The seller has no obligation to pay, and it allows the buyer's broker, not just escrow, to reveal the compensation that the seller is offering. And the last page of the BRBC can be used to satisfy that obligation as well, okay? And the third-party beneficiaries of it are listed in this document as well, okay? Not important right now. Just look at the form. It'll explain itself. Trust me on that one. And if you have any questions, jot it down, okay? Lastly, just to show you what's here, is the tenant representation and broker compensation agreement. If you're showing rental property, understand if you're getting paid by somebody's signing a new form, okay? And that's what this basically was designed to help you understand. I know you have a ton of questions. We had hoped to wrap this up in about 45 minutes. It hasn't happened. I'm certain that's because of me droning on. Remember a few things. Remember, this is an opportunity to demonstrate your professionalism. Don't fight against this because you can't. It's the law. Your obligation to use these forms begins on Wednesday. Your necessity in using the forms happens on August the 12th, not the 17th. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to jot them down, to write them out. When you got an invitation to this meeting, there was a little box you could check and submit questions. Don't hesitate to submit them. If you have a pen and pencil, write this down. 949-689-7300. That's my number. That's my direct number. Text me. If I'm not sitting in a meeting or a class like this, I will answer your call. Please review these forms. One more time, 949-689-7300. Okay. I may or may not have the answer. I have this folder with me now that I carry everywhere I go. And this is all the new forms. So when you say I'm talking about line 2CA1, I will have the form and I will look it up. If I'm driving down the road, I might not be able to answer it until I pull over and plot the form. But just know that we're here to support you. If I'm not available, don't hesitate to call Dennis. If he's not available, don't hesitate to call Todd. We are all going to have this information. We're going to do our best to get you through this process. Know that this is a huge opportunity for you to display your professionalism and to engage with your clients. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.